the work for us behind the scenes every day. It truly takes a village.
All right, and that will get started. We'll donate them, Lou.
Amber, with the status of labor talks with so many free agents, with an expansion draft, do you have any idea
What if the biggest star in a sport wasn't just being targeted by her rivals, but was also being systematically undermined by the very system that stood to make billions from her? It sounds completely insane. Conspiracy theory cooked up in the darkest corners of the internet, but a series of bizarre events culminating in a cold-blooded and frankly brutal decision by her own team's general manager has exposed a shocking truth behind the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. This isn't just about basketball anymore. It's a quiet war being waged in the shadows, a battle for control involving power, raw jealousy, and a league that seems to be actively sabotaging its own future. The story of what's really happening to Caitlin Clark is far darker and more complex than anyone realizes, and the Indiana Fever's front office might just be holding the smoking gun, their fingerprints all over a decision that has left the sports world speechless. It all started with an arrival that promised to change everything, a seismic shift in the landscape of professional sports. Caitlin Clark wasn't just another #1 draft pick. She was a cultural tidal wave, a once-in-a-generation talent poised to lift the entire WNBA into a new stratosphere it had only ever dreamed of. The numbers from her college career at Iowa were not just impressive, they were mythological, shattering scoring records held by legends like Pistol Pete Maravich and drawing television audiences that dwarfed major men's sporting events, including some NBA playoff games and the World Series. Her final college game drew a staggering 18.7 million viewers, a figure unheard of for women's sports. The hype was not just real, was a force of nature, an unstoppable commercial and cultural juggernaut. When the Indiana Fever drafted her, it was like a small market team winning a billion-dollar lottery. The economic impact was immediate and overwhelming. Ticket sales across the entire league didn't just rise, they exploded. Teams that once played in half-empty arenas were suddenly selling out, with some even having to move their games against the Fever to larger NBA venues just to accommodate the unprecedented demand. Prices on the secondary market skyrocketed, with fans willing to pay hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars just to witness the phenomenon in person. Her number 22 jersey became the highest selling of any draft pick in the history of any sport ever, selling out within an hour of the draft. The Caitlin Clark effect was a tangible, billion-dollar business stimulant, and the league, after decades of struggling for mainstream relevance, was suddenly basking in the glow of a new, brighter future. She was so much more than a player. She was a one-woman economic boom, the golden goose everyone in sports business had been waiting for. But that on-paper fantasy, the dream of a new era, quickly and violently collided with a much harsher, more brutal on-court reality. From the very first tip-off of her professional career, it was painfully clear that Caitlin Clark was a marked woman. The welcome she received from veteran players wasn't the typical rookie hazing or tough competition. Felt deeply personal, almost venomous. It was as if there was a league-wide memo sent out to make her life a living hell. Defenders were more physical with her than with anyone else on the court, administering a constant barrage of schvies, off-ball elbows, and hip checks that often went uncalled by the officials, who themselves seemed hesitant to protect the league's new star. This wasn't just tough play. Was a pattern. Fans saw it in the hard, unnecessary screen set by Brianna Stewart that sent Clark to the floor. They saw it in the hip check from her college rival, Angel Reese. Aggression reached a boiling point and captured the nation's attention during a game against the Chicago Sky, in a moment that went viral and sparked days of national outrage. Chicago player Kennedy Carter, after a brief exchange of words, delivered a vicious blindside shoulder check to Clark while she was away from the ball, waiting for an inbound pass. It wasn't a basketball play. It was a deliberate assault that sent Clark sprawling to the floor. Carter was seen mouthing expletives at Clark before the foul, and her post-game comments showed absolutely no remorse, only defiance. This cheap shot, later upgraded to a flagrant 1 foul by the league, perfectly encapsulated the hostility she was facing. This wasn't just tough defense, it was a message being sent by the league's old guard, a coordinated effort to humble the rookie who had stolen all the headlines. They seemed determined to prove she didn't belong, and they were willing to cross every line of sportsmanship to do it. But what was even more shocking than the hit itself, more telling than the blatant aggression, was the deafening chilling silence that followed from her own bench and front office, while the world was debating the flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark, with commentators from Stephen A. Smith to Charles Barkley condemning the dirty play. Her own team's response was puzzlingly timid and passive. There was no immediate on-court retaliation, no swarm of teammates getting in Kennedy Carter's face to defend their franchise player, the woman whose arrival was funding their new charter flights. Coach Christie Sides offered measured, almost passive comments after the game, talking about needing to learn from it. The lack of a fiery protective response left fans and analysts absolutely stunned. Where was the outrage? Where was the loyalty to the player who was single-handedly revitalizing their entire franchise and putting money in everyone's pockets? And the situation grew even more bizarre and infuriating when the team's general manager, the veteran executive Lynn Dunn, finally weighed in. Instead of condemning the dirty play and demanding the league protect its biggest star, Dunn made baffling statements that seemed to excuse the behavior. She suggested that the basketball gods would eventually handle it and that this level of physicality was just part of the game Clark had to get used to. Her words were an almost unthinkable abdication of responsibility, a public statement that essentially validated the targeting of her own star player. It was the first major red flag that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong inside the Indiana Fever organization. It was a clear sign that Clark's biggest battle might not be with her opponents, but with the very people in positions of power who were supposed to have her back. And that was before the ultimate, most shocking betrayal was even revealed to the world. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't get any stranger, the entire basketball world was rocked by a decision that defied all logic, all business sense, and all reason. Team USA officially announced its 12-player roster for the upcoming Paris Olympic, and the most famous, most watched, and most influential women's basketball player on the entire planet was not on it. Caitlin Clark, the woman who was drawing 18 million viewers to a game, had been snubbed. The official explanations offered by the selection committee were flimsy at best, almost insulting to the intelligence of the public. They cited her supposed lack of professional experience and a need to prioritize existing team chemistry. But these excuses rang completely hollow to anyone paying attention. The Olympics are the biggest stage in sports, a golden opportunity to grow the game and attract millions of new fans who might not otherwise tune in. Leaving Clark at home, the one player guaranteed to bring in a massive, unprecedented audience, felt like a deliberate act of commercial self-sabotage. It was like launching a blockbuster movie and leaving the main star off all the promotional posters. The move was so illogical from a business and marketing perspective that it immediately fueled widespread speculation that there were other darker forces at play. This wasn't about basketball. It was a power move. Statement from the establishment and the reverberations would expose the ugly underbelly of the league's politics. Official reasons for the Olympic snub were so weak that they practically invited the world to search for the real, hidden motive, and it didn't take long for the truth, or at least the pervasive and believable rumors, to start leaking out from credible sources. Respected sports journalists with deep connections to the league began reporting that there was significant resentment towards Clark from veteran players, many of whom were on the Olympic team and its selection committee. The rumor was that these established stars didn't want to deal with the Caitlin Clark circus, the immense media attention, the screaming fans, and the unavoidable fact that she would instantly become the face of the team in Paris. They viewed her fame as unearned, a product of hype, rather than paying her dues, and they were allegedly worried she would steal their spotlight on the global stage. Was portrayed as a decision to protect team chemistry, but it looked an awful lot like a classic textbook case of professional jealousy. The old guard of the WNBA, the players who had toiled in relative obscurity for years, seemed to be closing ranks to keep the new phenom in her place. They were willing to sacrifice the unprecedented growth of the sport to maintain their control over its hierarchy and narrative. It was a stunning revelation of the league's toxic internal politics, but the most brutal twist in this entire sordid story was yet to come, and it would come directly from the front office of the Indiana Fever, from the one person tasked with protecting Clark above all others. You're in the aftermath of the Olympic firestorm. Criticism rained down on Team USA from every corner of the media. The world looked to the Indiana Fever's management for a response. Everyone expected, or at least desperately hoped, that they would come out swinging in defense of their superstar. They could have released a powerful statement expressing their profound disappointment, highlighting the colossal missed opportunity for the sport's growth. They could have publicly and fiercely championed their player, decrying the decision as a mistake. Instead, General Manager Lynn Dunn delivered the final cold-blooded blow. In her first public comments about the snub, Dunn didn't defend Caitlin Clark. She didn't express outrage. She didn't question the committee's logic. Instead, she effectively endorsed the decision, and becoming a mouthpiece for the very establishment that had just disrespected her player. She spoke at length about how the time off would be good for Caitlin, how it would give her much needed rest after a long college season, and how she could use the snub as motivation for the future. On the surface, it sounded like a reasonable diplomatic take, but in the context of everything that had happened, it was a staggering, unforgivable betrayal. Rather than fighting for her player's rightful place on the world stage, the general manager of the Indiana Fever chose to publicly align with the league's power brokers. This was the brutal decision whispered about in league circles. It was a calculated move to plate the league's veteran powers, a signal to the establishment that the Fever's front office would not rock the boat or cause trouble, even if it meant sacrificing their own star's global coming out party. The message, delivered with cold precision, was clear. The system was more important than the individual. Old guard's feelings mattered more than progress, and Caitlin Clark was completely on her own. The staggering hypocrisy of the entire situation becomes blindingly, infuriatingly clear when you simply follow the money trail. While the league's old guard and even her own team's management seemed intent on humbling her and putting her in her place, the business side of the WNBA was reaping a massive, unprecedented windfall from her name alone. The league's viewership numbers for the 2024 season were up by triple-digit percentages on all their broadcast partners, and increase driven almost entirely by Indiana Fever games. The league was suddenly in a position of power for it. Upcoming media rights negotiations, with Clark's presence being the main bargaining chip that could add hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, to the next deal. For the first time in its history, the WNBA finally committed to providing charter flights for all its teams, a long overdue move that was fast-tracked almost entirely due to the safety and logistical concerns surrounding the mob-like crowds that followed Caitlin Clark through commercial airports. Every single business metric, from merchandise sales that shattered all previous records to social media engagement that rivaled the NFL, told the same undeniable story. Caitlin Clark was a financial juggernaut, a one-woman corporation, single-handedly elevating the league's entire economic profile. They were more than happy to cash the checks her stardom provided, using her face and name to sell tickets and secure massive sponsorships. Yet behind the scenes, the very same power players were making decisions that actively punished and suppressed that same stardom. They desperately wanted her money, but they didn't want her fame to overshadow their own. It's a staggering, mind-bending contradiction that exposes the deep-seated, dysfunctional conflict at the very heart of the WNBA. The saga of Caitlin Clark is no longer just a sports story. It's a complex and unfolding drama about a generational talent colliding with a rigid, resentful, and seemingly self-destructive establishment. From the constant unpunished on-court targeting by rivals to the deafening silence and bizarrely complicit comments from her own team's management, and culminating in the illogical and politically motivated Olympic snub, a deeply disturbing pattern has emerged. The WNBA has been handed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity on a silver platter, a player who transcends the sport and brings millions of new eyes and dollars to their product. But instead of celebrating and elevating her, the system seems pathologically determined to control and contain her. The actions of the Indiana Fever's GM, Lynn Dunn, in particular, raise a chilling and fundamental question about the league's future. Was her public acceptance of the snub a colossal failure of leadership born of incompetence, or was it a far more sinister, calculated, and brutal decision to side with the league's powerful veterans over her own franchise player? The league is playing a dangerous game, one that risks alienating the very audience it so desperately needs to survive and thrive. The establishment may have won this battle, but in doing so, they may have just started a war with the millions of new fans Caitlin Clark brought to their doorstep, and that is a war they cannot possibly